We start with Israel's war against Hamas and growing calls to end the devastating conflict in the Gaza Strip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed that he will travel to Washington on Monday to discuss the conflict with the Trump administration. One of the Prime Minister's top advisors is already in Washington talking with US officials ahead of that meeting. Donald Trump says he's hoping for a truce in the Palestinian territory within a week. After claiming success in the joint action against Iran, the US president now wants Israel to make the deal in Gaza.
Well, he's coming here. We're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about the great success we had. I mean, we had an incredible, in Iran, we had an incredible success, like really nobody's had in many, many years. How to go forward. We're also going to talk about Gaza. We want to get the rest. We got a lot of hostages back, but we're going to talk about Gaza.
Giorgio Cafiero is CEO of Gulf State Analytics, which assesses geopolitical risk. He's also an adjunct assistant professor at Georgetown University and joins us from Washington. Welcome to DW. So we have this increased flurry of military and diplomatic activity. Do you believe that that is bringing Gaza any closer to a ceasefire?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your network. Always good to be with you. There seems to be quite a bit of optimism on the part of Trump and others in his administration that a ceasefire is coming soon. I think it's important to see this within the context of the 12-day war that Israel launched on Iran last month. That seems to be a rather important variable in the equation. You know, for quite a bit of time, Netanyahu was under pressure domestically to keep the war going due to political factors and the nature of his coalition. Now, with Netanyahu being championed by a large segment of Israeli population as a war hero, he seems to have a little bit more of a standing, and he can use that to possibly bring Israel into a ceasefire with Hamas at some point soon. There is also, of course, now Trump putting pressure on the Israeli judiciary to drop the case against Netanyahu, to drop the charges against the Israeli prime minister. That is seen as something else that can possibly give Netanyahu more incentive to push ahead with a ceasefire. I don't understand how that will play out with Israeli law, but of course that pressure from Trump is also a factor in the equation too.
Okay, so if you're correct then, this is about internal domestic Israeli politics and Netanyahu's relationship with Trump. It's not about the situation on the ground.
Well, again, going back to the Israel-Iran conflict, I think that's also tied to this too. There is this narrative that Trump pushes that Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated. Of course, that doesn't seem to exactly be true, but that's what Trump says. And there also is no denying that Israel did force Iran to suffer some very, very huge blows. And I think maybe on the part of Israel's leadership and many Israelis, also many here in Washington, there's an assessment that with Iran having suffered these huge blows, by extension, Hamas, which is supported by Iran, might be weaker, and thus there is less of a threat that Hamas poses to Israel. At the same time, when we talk about what kind of objectives the Israeli military could have on the ground in Gaza, as you're asking about, I mean, practically everything in Gaza is destroyed. So there's kind of an open question. I mean, what would Israel gain from continuing to wage this war much longer? And then again, also, I'll add that a recent poll showed that I believe about 75% of the Israeli public wants to see the war come to an end. And this is beyond just simply a ceasefire. This is about wanting the war to end, of course, in exchange for every single Israeli held hostage or captive to come home from Gaza.
Right. And so how do Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu come up with a ceasefire without Arabs in the room?
Well, we should, of course, keep in mind that Donald Trump, and we saw this in January at the beginning of Trump's second term, the U.S. has the cards and has all the leverage. In one phone call, Donald Trump or Steve Witkoff could make it clear to Israel that they have to enter into a ceasefire, Israel's ability to wage these wars, these military operations, and to occupy land outside of Israel's UN-recognized borders, this is only possible because of U.S. support. So, I mean, ultimately, the center of gravity here is Washington. There's a question about to what extent Trump is going to put pressure on Israel. Again, that's another question, but there's no doubt that the U.S. can pressure Israel into stopping any of these military operations whenever Washington wants.
Just to follow up on the point you made about Israel's objective on the ground having pretty much destroyed everything that there is in Gaza. On Monday, we heard from the Israeli opposition leader, Yair Lapid. He said there is no benefit, there is no longer any benefit for the state of Israel from continuing the war in Gaza, only damage on the security, political and economic level. So I wonder if we can sort of take that and look ahead, because after all this destruction, all these deaths, if and when some sort of peace is finally established, does Israel just resume its pre-October 2023 position in world affairs?
Well, there's a few things to get through before we get to that point. I'll just first point out that there are some serious stumbling blocks to a ceasefire in Gaza. These questions about Hamas's demands and Israel's demands and whether or not, the two sides can find a compromise remains to be seen. Hamas is pretty firm that it's not going to disarm, and they are demanding that all Israeli occupation forces on the ground in Gaza leave the enclave before there's any ceasefire that Hamas agrees to. Putting all of that aside, and let's just assume that the two sides do come to a ceasefire. No, I don't see Israel going back to the global status it had on October 6th, 2023, as a consequence of the genocide in Gaza, the extreme human suffering in the coastal enclave. This has done so much to require the world, at least really the non-Western world, and even parts of the West too, to look at Israel very differently. I don't think Israel can just go back to the type of status it had on the international stage by signing a ceasefire. I'll also add that these ceasefires certainly bring relief, but unless the root causes of the violence are addressed, it's just going to be a matter of time until violence resumes. Even if Hamas as an entity ceases to exist, if the Palestinians believe that they have a struggle, and if there is an occupation of Palestinian land, Palestinians are deprived of their most fundamental rights, there will always be a Palestinian resistance. If we don't address the root causes of the violence will just resume at some point down the line.
Understood. Thanks for talking us through that. Giorgio Cafiero from Gulf State Analytics.
Thank you.